Yeah, correct. So NOFA New York, it stands for the Northeast Organic Farming Association. And we have different organizations that represent different states. So our organization specifically works within New York State.
Cool. And I'd never heard of you guys before going to the fair and doing the pictures there. So I never knew the organization existed. So can you tell us a little bit about what NOFA does and all that kind of stuff? I read a little bit online, so when it was founded and that kind of stuff. But
Yep. So all of that, if anyone wants to go and check it out, our website is NOFANY.org, NOFANewYork.org. And we started in 1983 and part of the local foods organic movement. And, a lot of us can't imagine the world before organic food was a thing, but there was a time when it wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
And so we had this beautiful group of people who wanted to grow food in a way that protected the earth and just took into consideration the ecosystem and really took into consideration the farming community and really advocating on behalf of small farmers. So just this, group of people, I like to call them our beloved old timers. Many of them are still with us. They're still our board members. Oh, wow. And so I really am so excited to still have them to draw the history from. Yeah. NOFA New York began sort of as part of that movement. So that was actually before the organic standards became a thing at the federal level, which sort of dictates how organic certification works.
Okay. So is NOFA a national organization and there's different chapters in each state? Is that correct or is that wrong?
Nope. So there's a few layers there to uncover. So we do two things. So we do a lot of things, but I should say we have sort of a division of labor between our two offices. The office here in Syracuse, we really focus on policy and advocacy and also education.
Okay.
The other office in Binghamton focuses on the actual certification of farms.
Gotcha.
So there's agencies across the country that certify for organic, and that all comes down from federal policies.
Yeah.
But then all the organizations within the NOFA umbrella exist just within the Northeast.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So, so organic farming, like a lot of the regulations of it started up in the early 2000s. Is that correct? Or am I wrong with that?
Oh God,
in terms of modern day restrictions.
So I should know this, but now I'm going to go look it up. The organic standards, I want to say they were passed in 94. Okay. And so it was in the 90s that they became a federal thing where you are not allowed to put a label on your product and sell your product as organic unless you are certified.
Gotcha. Okay. Mm-hmm. And how important is that for farmers for the difference between organic and non-organic farming? Is it, I'd imagine it's more costly, it's more strenuous, to be a certified organic farmer.
Yep, there's a lot of things that go into organic farming. So one thing is, on a very basic level, organic farmers are not using a huge amount of pesticides, herbicides. There are some products that are naturally derived that are approved to be used, but they're not synthetically.
Gotcha. They're not using Roundup on their corn.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Not using Roundup. And I guess the difference between, there are farms that practice organically and don't get certified, and that's fine. We work with a lot of those farms. And, part of the reason they don't go through certification is that, there is a cost involved. Yeah. There's a lot of record keeping. You keep track of everything, seed to sale, pretty much. Everything is traceable. And also there's, there's a level of verification. So we actually have inspectors that go to the farm and verify that what you say in your certification application is actually the way that you're practicing.
Wow.
Yeah. So one example of that is that you have to like rotate your crops and use cover crops. And those are all things that have to do with soil health.
Yeah.
And when you have really healthy soil, you don't have to have as many chemical, you don't have to have all those
Right.
inputs.
Yeah, you don't have to put as much into it.
Mm-hmm.
There is I'd say, well, the biggest thing that has really gotten me interested in farming, or at least like learning more about it, because I always think I have a pretty healthy sized yard. I live in the city, but we have a good sized yard, and so I always think I'm going to plant something, I'm going to grow something, and it hasn't happened in the last 2 years. But I read Dan Barber's book, The Third Plate, and especially talking about the farming from like Klaus Martins and things like that, just really was kind of an eye-opener for me. Especially I think that somebody that important is in Penyan that's doing this, that's farming it this way. So that's when I first started to hear things like cover crops and soil or whatever, soil rotation, what's it called, where crop rotation. So just things like that, it was the first time that I started to get into it. And then just thinking about like how strict it must be for farms to have to follow a lot of those regulations to be classified as organic farmers. So if they're going to be a certified organic farm, they have to document everything that they're doing with their crop. I mean, like, how does that work?
Yep. So they create an organic plan, and now I have to just throw out the caveat that I don't do the certifications.
Yeah, right.
So I'm not familiar with the process A to Z, but they do have to have an organic plan that sort of states how they're going to go about doing things, and it's very specific to each farm.
Okay.
So say you are a farm that has another farm that's your neighbor that's practicing conventional, you have to make sure conventionally, so they may be using chemical sprays and whatnot. You have to show that you say have enough space that that drift isn't coming from that farm to your farm. Otherwise, you can't be certified organic.
Wow.
So that is particular to a farm within that context.
So can you tell me, tell me a little bit more about what you do specifically with NOFA-NY or New York?
Yeah, so my role is as an outreach coordinator. I am on the education team, and so I plan and staff a lot of events. Some of those are at farms or produced for the sake of educating farmers, and some are, the bulk of them are actually consumer outreach events. So NOFA historically has existed to serve first and foremost farmers.
Yeah.
We're also farmer-led. One of the stipulations of being on our board, the board governance is, because we are a nonprofit, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. Our board has to have at least half the members are farmers.
Oh, wow.
So that's like really unique to our organization, and that's just because first and foremost, our farmers are the priority. But saying that, you can't have farms and you can't have farmers without consumers. So, part of my role is just sort of explaining why organic matters, why building those relationships with your local farmers is important, why buying from local farms is important.
Yeah. That's, what's the biggest challenge you've seen in that role? I mean, is it more so, I'd imagine like, in your role, a lot of it getting together like the farmers and kind of connecting them, that's got to be a lot easier than trying to get the community engaged in organic farming. Maybe I'm completely wrong.
Yeah, it's kind of twofold. One of the biggest things is just explaining what organic is. And so coming into this, I'm not even 1 year into this role. And so I've just been out in the field sort of gauging what the landscape is like. What are the sort of questions that people have and how can I answer those best? I am big on narrative, so I just really like to tell the farmers' stories and draw a picture of what, organic practices look like, talking about things like soil health. But then also just doing the events, a big part of that is just community building, gathering people, celebrating food, helping build those connections. So it's education and community building.
Yeah. What got you into, like, what brought you to NOFA to get in this role?
I just had a big smile because I love working for NOFA. It's kind of my dream job, but I moved out to New York from California 3 years ago I started a master's program with the Syracuse University, their food studies program. And I wasn't 100% sure what my dream job was. I was still sort of wondering whether I was going to go the research path or the practicing path. But in between my undergraduate degree, the 10 years in between going back to school, I worked in restaurants, I worked on a farm, just the majority of my jobs were all related to the food system. And so I was always thinking about these gaps in the food system and how to make these connections. And without really understanding what community building looked like, I was already sort of in that world. Cool. So I think it's sort of a mixture of my interests and what I've come to learn as part of being a part of the food studies community within that program. And then within that program, you naturally end up being in a world of people who care about food systems issues.
Yeah. What are those gaps in the food system in the area?
Yeah, I mean, so some of the gaps are just these disconnects between a lot of times you have restaurants purchasing food from across the country. Okay. And that's not necessarily just a physical gap, but it's also just the way distribution works in this country in our food system. We operate in a system where we really value efficiency, over maybe taking time to sort of think about the value that when something is done a little bit less efficiency, that value adds. It may not be dollars per se, but it might be value to our community. Yeah.
Is it possible, do you think, for a restaurant in Syracuse or in Onondaga County, where in central New York, to operate 100% with local ingredients?
I don't really think that that's possible. No, I think a lot of businesses do a great job of incorporating as many local products as possible. Yeah. But it's a hard nut to crack, Yeah. A lot of times, what I've heard from people who have worked in the restaurant business and, it's you're sort of taught in a certain way to order from the distributor, and you don't take into consideration things like seasonality. And so maybe it's just I want this tomato and it doesn't matter what time of the year it is, I want it for this dish. And we operate in a food system where I keep saying we, and it's very much generation dependent, what I would say the majority of folks have grown up in a system where it's very consumer centric, where we can have whatever we want when we want it. And that's just not the reality of how food exists. Right. Without certain technologies, which are amazing and so helpful. Right. But here in the Northeast, we have weather to battle. We can't necessarily grow everything we want year round like someone can in another part of the country. But there's ways to extend the season, so to speak, with greenhouses and whatnot. And that's really helpful and allows farmers to offer more throughout longer periods of the year. Yeah.
What, in your ideal picture of kind of that balance between farming and restaurants or average household family, whatever it is, what do you think? What do you picture is that like ideal balance of food production and consumption? I mean, I know you say like it's impossible to get 100% of your ingredients that are local, but what do you think is that balance?
I think it's different for everybody, and I think you do what you can, certainly, organic food, most people can see that a lot of the time it costs more. And we sort of discussed some of the reasons why that costs more. Beyond the certification and the record keeping, they're also, because farmers are employing these cultural practices as far as using cover crops rather than, and building soil health rather than using chemicals, they're often using more labor too. And not across the board, but I find that most or I should say a lot of organic farmers want to pay their employees fair wages, and so in order to pay for fair wages, that cost has to come back. So again, just educating yourself on what these things mean. And it can be really difficult. There's so many labels out there. How do you know what's what and what they mean? And if there is any policy attached to it or not. So I think to the extent that you can educate yourself, having conversations with farmers, is always great. But I would say, do what you can, do what you can afford. And maybe for you, it's if you don't have a lot of money to spend on these organic foods, but you find that you have some time, maybe you keep a garden, and maybe that garden is one tomato plant. It's like, all these little things, they really count and add up. So yeah.
What do you think is, when I think of like, I've seen so many things change in Syracuse and like the food scene, and I'm happy you don't see farm to table as much anymore, because I think it's just becoming more of like a common practice. I had Alex from Amano on, and they do a lot to source locally. And if Alex had his way, he would be growing a lot of his own produce and just walking out back and picking it and then putting it in his dish. But you don't see them advertising themselves as this farm-to-table restaurant. Like, even 3 years ago, there were so many that were popping up, farm-to-table this, farm-to-table that. So I'm happy to see that that's kind of progressed, and it's just kind of more common practice. But what do you think is the biggest, or one of the biggest issues or, issues that can hurt organic farmers in the area?
That can hurt organic farmers.
Like what's one of the, things they have to look out for, I guess? I mean, what's the one thing that's hurting organic farmers? I'm assuming, like, is there one common theme when you're talking to a lot of these farms that they're saying, we're being affected by this, whether it's lower prices or, climate or whatever it is? I
was just going to say, well, climate is a big one. So this year, for example, we had a really rainy spring. And so farmers all over the place were struggling with planting. And so a lot of things were late or never made it to market because of that really heavy rainy spring season. So that affects what they can offer, when they can offer it, and how much it will eventually cost. Also, trends, definitely food trends affect people. If all of a sudden there's a big push for kale or something else, that consumer centric demand. I would say that I would really like to see a shift from, things being really focused on what the consumer wants to what is realistically available from a physical, natural world standpoint, because I think farmers try to grow what they can to the extent that, taking into consideration, just from a business standpoint, it's smart to grow what your market wants. But with farming, there are physical limitations to when you can grow certain things. So I think understanding those expectations going in and, becoming a community supported agriculture CSA member can be a really great educational opportunity. You can sign up with a farm that offers this sort of program, and every farm does it a little bit different. The traditional model is that you pay up front at the beginning of the season, say $250 to $500. It's really a wide range, depending on what the offerings are, and how many weeks the program lasts. So you sign up as a member, and you essentially become a member at the farm. You're an investor. The money that you give up front allows the farm to buy seed, buy organic fertilizers, all the costs that you don't think about that a farm has at the beginning of the season. It's really like a huge infusion of cash that they need every spring or winter. Are
those programs really, I know that there's a few of them in the area that I've seen, but are they that important to local farm? Like, are they that, like, obviously they're important to local farms, but is it a certain size farm that's going to affect? Like, do you typically see small to medium-sized farms offering that, or is it larger farms or everybody?
There's really, it runs the gamut. You can have a 25-member CSA, like I think it's SUNY Morrisville. I recently heard their students run like a 25-member CSA, mostly just for the campus community. And then you have 400-member CSAs. But in a nutshell, the idea with CSA programs is that you are really giving, becoming a part of the farm, and you're sharing a little bit of that risk, because if you have a slow start to the season, and you might have a week off because the farm just simply can't offer that. But in the end, the CSA farms tend to give you more value than market value. So if you break down on a weekly basis, say you're paying $25, market value, it might look closer to $35.
What do you see as like the future of organic farming in New York, or at least in the area?
Yeah, so I've seen some interesting things as sort of a newcomer to this community. I was in the West before, and it looks a little bit different.
What is the biggest difference?
Well, I think a lot of the farms are larger in like in California. Just the geography allows for larger swaths of land to be utilized for one single farm. Just simply the geography here in the Northeast lends itself to smaller farms.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's like a really rich community. It's really a small world. I've come to know that week to week there's just so much overlap with the people that I meet and what they're doing. So it's a really small, warm community. But as far as looking ahead, you have things like hemp is a big thing. And so our organization just began certifying hemp operations. So if some folks don't know, the hemp became legalized in New York a few years back, but it became federally legal with the 2018 Farm Bill. And so because organic policy is dictated at the federal level, we couldn't certify for organic until that was made federally legal. So now we are certifying. And so the thing with hemp is that it's a great opportunity for farmers to diversify their operation. There's a lot of talk of, diversification in any business is, smart. Diversify your revenue stream, and it's the same with farmers. They might have a CSA. They might also go to the farmers market. They might, make sauerkraut, and those are just sort of gives you a level of protection within your business to have different product offerings. So hemp is another product that you can grow it for fiber, or you can grow it for CBD products. So that's a new thing, especially in the Northeast, New York specifically. CBD
is blown up in I'd imagine everywhere, but especially here over this last year.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
Yeah,
I actually should, full disclosure, I also work for Head and Heel, Main Street Farms. So I'm a supporter there.
Wait, that's Main Street Farms?
Yeah, it's separate business, but it's all grown on the same farm.
So are they producing it themselves?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's 30 acres. I was just out at the farm this weekend. 30 acres of hemp, and it's just or all organically grown, and just really lovely and beautiful. And
yeah. What's the hardest thing with that crop, with growing hemp?
Gosh, well, I don't grow the hemp, so maybe we should get Bobcat or Alan in here.
Bobcat on here.
You definitely should.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I think
actually that would be a fun podcast. You, Bobcat, and Mark.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. Yeah. My buds.
Yeah, if they're listening.
Yep.
When this comes out, we need to make that happen.
Yes, make that happen. I know that growing for CBD in particular, you're growing for different qualities than when you're growing for fiber. So you really want to have concentrated terpene levels, those CBD compounds, and also watch for that THC level, which you want to stay below 0.3%. So just...
That's wild.
Yeah. Having as many of the compounds that you do want there.
Do you know, is there one crop that's like the biggest moneymaker, like the premier thing for farmers to be focusing on, like this year?
Oh, premier crop.
I'm wondering if it is like hemp, for CBD oil because it's blowing up so much, or...
Yeah, I think hemp definitely can provide a huge return on investment compared to vegetables. So that is an option. I know there's limited permits that the New York State government allows. So it's unfortunately not something that everybody can grow.
You can't just jump into it.
Yeah, and also if everybody grew it, then you run into those. It would be a lot of flooding on the market and everything. But certainly there's space. And one thing I really enjoy about working for Main Street and Head and Heel is that Alan has really been on top of the policy work and advocating on behalf of small farmers. Cool. He really doesn't want to see what's happened in other states where you have big corporations just buying up large swaths of land. And that's actually not a disconnected issue from the issue of dairy farms closing down in New York State. So you have dairy farms going out of business and this is all hypothetical, but you can have people come in and swoop in and buy the land and plant a bunch of hemp. And so Alan has worked on promoting policies to put in place where, say a certain amount of permits are allowed just for small farmers. And then also putting in regulations that protect consumers. There isn't a whole lot of regulation right now. It's sort of a gray area when it comes to CBD products, and this is across the country. And so you can have people selling things that aren't actually what they are. So
I'd imagine there's a lot of that in that industry right now, just because there's so much of it.
Yes. So buy products from people who provide third-party testing is what I recommend.
Yeah. So if there's one thing that you would hope the general public would know about organic farmers or farming, what would that be?
I would say that when you see, a lot of times people say, they don't buy organic food because it costs more. And I totally get that. And if it's out of your reach, I understand that. Talk to farms and understand what their practices are, but also understand that generally organic farmers don't make a lot of money. And they're not doing, they're doing it because they believe in it. They're doing it because they believe in protecting the environment. They believe in giving people good, healthy food. And there are community members. And so to the extent that you can interact and get to know them and support them whenever possible, I really recommend it because it's a really beautiful community. So saying that, we have an upcoming conference. So NOFA has, I believe we are in our 35th year of our conference. It's it's really quite the big endeavor. We're just jumping really headstrong into our conference planning period. But the past 10 years, we've been in Saratoga Springs, and this year we are actually going to be in Syracuse.
Awesome.
We'll be at the On Center, and it is, I'll get the correct date. Maybe we can post it somewhere, but it'll be the second or third week of January.
Okay.
Cool. So we always hold it in the January because farmers are busy much of the rest of the year.
Yeah.
So this gives them the opportunity to come, and we hold a lot of workshops that are about organic farming production.
Okay.
But also we have workshops regarding like food systems policy, food justice work. We do homesteading workshops. So, we might have a cheese making workshop,
awesome.
Gardening. We do a lot of gardening workshops.
Yeah.
So even if you're a home gardener and not necessarily looking to grow on a farm scale.
Yeah.
But then we also have entertainment. We have really good food. All the food comes from our farmers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we either pay them for the food or we work out trades so that they can attend the conference. But all the food is really, really good. And then we have a big trade show that's really fun. And this year we have some new things in the pipeline that are going to be, more geared towards the average public member.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about that. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of fun things. And like I said, organic farmers are just this really special, unique club that I kind of call myself like a farmer groupie because I mean, while I do keep a garden, I have worked on farms, there's a lot of work to go before I could call myself a farmer by any stretch of the word.
That's awesome. Well, Briana, thank you so much for taking the time out and coming down and sitting on the podcast. Great.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.